The smell hit me first. Expensive perfume mixed with cigar smoke and something darker. Something that made my stomach clench with an instinct I couldn't name. I pressed my back against the kitchen's swinging door, balancing 3 plates of lobster thermidor on my aching arms, and took a breath that tasted like grease and desperation. "Table 12 needs their wine," Marco hissed, shoving past me with barely a glance. "The blonde's been snapping her fingers for 5 minutes." I nodded, too tired to speak. My feet screamed inside shoes held together with duct tape and prayers. 6 doubles this week. 6 nights of smiling until my face hurt. Of pretending I didn't see the way men's eyes slid over me like I was part of the furniture. Of counting tips that never quite covered the rent. Russo's was the kind of restaurant where reservations took months and the chandeliers cost more than my yearly salary. I'd worked here for 3 years, invisible among the marble columns and gold-trimmed plates, a ghost in a black uniform that had seen better days. The dining room sprawled before me like a different world, all soft lighting and murmured conversations, the gentle clink of crystal that sounded like money. I wove between tables with practiced efficiency, my body remembering the steps even when my mind wandered to the stack of medical bills waiting in my apartment, to my mother's voice on the phone asking when I'd visit, to the emptiness that had become so familiar I barely noticed it anymore. Table 12 sat in the corner, the best spot in the house. The kind of table you couldn't request, the kind that was held for people who made the owner nervous. She saw me first. "Finally," the woman said, her voice cutting through the restaurant's gentle hum like a knife through silk. "We've been waiting forever." I'd seen beautiful women before. Russo's attracted them like moths to flame. But she was something else. Platinum blonde hair swept into an elegant twist, diamonds at her throat that caught the light with every breath, a dress that probably cost more than my car. Her red lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I apologize for the wait," I said, my voice steady despite the way my hands trembled. 3 years of this, and I still felt small under the gaze of women who'd never known what it meant to choose between medicine and food. "Your wine selection. Just bring us the Chateau Margaux," she interrupted, waving one manicured hand as if swatting away an insect. "The 2005. And tell the help in the kitchen to hurry up with our appetizers. We don't have all night." The help. The words settled over me like ash, and I felt something inside me go very still. "Of course," I managed, and turned away before she could see my face. But that's when I saw him. He sat across from her, and the air around him seemed different. Heavier, charged with something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Dark suit that fit like it had been made for him, because it probably had been. Black hair touched with silver at the temples. Strong hands resting on the table, and I noticed his knuckles. The scars that spoke of violence even if his expression didn't. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds before rain. And when they met mine, I felt pinned, studied, seen in a way that made me want to run. There was intelligence there, and something else. Something cold and calculating that reminded me of predators I'd seen in documentaries, the ones who watched and waited before they struck. "Sweetheart," the blonde said, her voice pulling his attention back to her. But not before I saw something flicker across his face. Annoyance, maybe. Or interest. "Are you even listening to me?" I forced myself to move, to walk away. But I could feel his gaze following me across the restaurant. My skin prickled with awareness, and I nearly dropped the plates I was carrying when Marco appeared beside me. "That's Dante Moretti," he whispered, his face pale. "Don't fuck this up, Lily. Just stay away from that table if you can. Dante Moretti." The name meant nothing to me, but the way Marco said it, like a prayer or a curse, made my mouth go dry. "Who is he?" Marco grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Nobody you want to know. Just do your job and stay invisible." But it was too late for that. I retrieved the wine from the cellar, my mind racing. The bottle was old, expensive, the kind we kept locked away for special occasions. My hands shook as I carried it up the narrow stairs, and I told myself it was just exhaustion, just the weight of another endless shift. The dining room had grown darker somehow, the shadows longer. I approached table 12 with my heart hammering against my ribs, And I didn't understand why, until I was standing beside them again, until I could smell his cologne, something dark and woodsy that made me think of forests at night, of dangerous things hidden in the dark. "Your wine," I said, keeping my eyes down as I presented the bottle to him, not to her. Protocol. The man always tasted first, even if the woman had ordered. He looked at me for a long moment, and I felt exposed under that gaze, like he could see through my cheap uniform to all the desperation and fear I kept carefully hidden. "Open it," he said, and his voice was exactly what I'd expected. Deep, controlled, the kind of voice that made you listen even when you didn't want to. There was an accent there, something Italian that softened certain words and hardened others. I reached for my wine key, but my hands were shaking now, really shaking. And the exhaustion that had been building for days suddenly crashed over me like a wave. The bottle slipped. Everything happened in slow motion. I lunged for it, my body moving on instinct, and somehow I caught it before it hit the ground. But the momentum carried me forward, and I stumbled, falling against the table. The wine sloshed. A few drops, just a few, barely anything, splashed onto the blonde's dress. It wasn't a gasp or an exclamation. It was a full-throated scream that cut through the restaurant's gentle atmosphere like a gunshot, and suddenly every eye in the room was on us. "You stupid, clumsy bitch." She was on her feet, her face twisted with rage, and I saw something in her eyes that terrified me more than anger. I saw satisfaction, like she'd been waiting for an excuse. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs? Do you?" "I'm so sorry," I stammered, my voice cracking. The bottle was still clutched in my hands, and I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never come back. "I didn't mean... You're sorry?" She laughed, high and cruel. "You're sorry? This is Valentino, you ignorant little waitress. This costs more than you make in a year." The manager was rushing over, his face red, and I knew what was coming. I'd seen it happen to other servers, the ones who made mistakes with the wrong customers. I'd be fired, blacklisted, unable to get another job at any decent restaurant in the city. My mother's voice echoed in my head. "You're all I have, Lily. Please don't give up." "Mrs. Moretti, I am so deeply apologetic," the manager began, but she cut him off. "I want her fired, now, and I want her to pay for this dress. Pay for it." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I didn't have that kind of money. I could barely afford to eat. "That seems excessive," a voice said, and the entire room went quiet. Dante Moretti was standing now, and he moved with a grace that didn't match his size, with a coiled tension that suggested violence held barely in check. He hadn't raised his voice, but somehow everyone heard him anyway. "Dante," the blonde started, but he held up one hand, and she fell silent immediately. There was fear in her eyes now, I realized. Real fear. He turned to me, and I felt like I was drowning in those gray eyes, like he could see every secret I'd ever kept. "How much do you make in a year?" he asked, and his voice was almost gentle, but there was something underneath it, something that made the question feel dangerous. I don't... My voice came out as barely a whisper. "How much?" 28,000, I said, and hated how small I sounded. "Before taxes." He nodded, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. Then he reached into his jacket, and I saw the manager tense, saw the way the other diners suddenly became very interested in their plates, and pulled out a wallet made of leather so soft it looked like silk. "Here," he said, placing a stack of bills on the table. I couldn't see how much, but it was more money than I'd ever seen in one place. "For the dress, and for your trouble." The blonde's mouth fell open. "You can't be serious." "Go home, Vanessa," he said. And there was no warmth in his voice now, just ice and authority. "Antonio will drive you." As if summoned by his words, a man appeared at the edge of my vision. Tall, built like a wall, with cold eyes that swept the room like he was cataloging threats. Security. Of course he had security. "But our dinner." "Now," she went. I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the marble floor like gunshots, and I felt like I'd just witnessed something I shouldn't have, like I'd been given a glimpse behind a curtain that was meant to stay closed. The restaurant slowly came back to life around us, conversations resuming in careful murmurs. "I should go," I said, because I didn't know what else to say, because the money on the table was still there, and he was still looking at me, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of something vast and dark that I didn't understand. "Wait," he said, and I froze. "Your name." It wasn't a question. It was a command, delivered so naturally that I answered before I could think better of it. Lily Chen. He smiled then, just a slight curve of his lips, but it changed his entire face, made him look almost human, almost safe. Almost. "Lily," he repeated, like he was tasting my name. "You should be more careful. The next person might not be so understanding." Then he walked away, flanked by the security guard who'd materialized from nowhere, and I was left standing in the middle of Russo's with my hands still shaking, and the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the air like smoke. I didn't know it then, but my life had just changed forever. The money on the table was $50,000 in cash, and tucked between the bills was a business card with nothing on it but a phone number written in dark ink. I didn't sleep that night. The money sat on my kitchen table like an accusation, still wrapped in the rubber band he'd used, still carrying the faint scent of expensive leather and something darker I couldn't identify. $50,000. I'd counted it 3 times, my hands trembling so badly I kept losing track, kept having to start over. The business card lay beside it, stark white against the chipped laminate. No name, no company, just 10 digits written in handwriting that was surprisingly elegant for a man who had scars on his knuckles. "You should be more careful. The next person might not be so understanding." I paced my tiny studio apartment as dawn crept through the threadbare curtains, painting everything in shades of gray that reminded me of his eyes. The walls felt closer than usual, the ceiling lower, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made some terrible mistake, that accepting that money had bound me to something I didn't understand, but God, I needed it. The stack of medical bills sat in their usual place beside the sink. My mother's hospital visits, the specialist she needed but couldn't afford, the prescriptions that cost more than groceries. I'd been making payment plans on payment plans, juggling due dates like a circus act, watching the numbers grow while my bank account shrank. This money could change everything. It could save her. But nothing was free. I'd learned that lesson early and hard. Learned it in the way men's eyes followed me when I walked home late at night, in the weight of every favor that came with strings attached, in the price of survival in a city that chewed up people like me and spit out the bones. So what was the price of $50,000 from a man whose name made Marco go pale? My phone buzzed, making me jump. A text from an unknown number. "Take the day off. You've earned it." My blood ran cold. How did he have my number? I'd never given it to him. I'd barely spoken to him. Before I could process that, another text arrived. "The money is yours. No conditions. But if you need anything, call." I stared at those words until they blurred. No conditions. Right. And I was the Queen of England. But even as I tried to convince myself to refuse, to return every dollar, I was already pulling out my phone, already dialing my mother's hospital to make a payment on her account. The money disappeared in chunks. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. Eaten up by a medical system that treated people like transactions and debt like destiny. When I was done, I had 32,000 left, still more than I'd ever had, still enough to change things. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt like I'd just signed a contract written in invisible ink. 3 days passed before I saw him again. I'd gone back to work the next night despite his text, because I couldn't afford not to, because sitting in my apartment with that money felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Marco had pulled me aside the moment I walked in, his face grave. "What happened after they left?" he'd demanded. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing. He paid for the dress." Marco's eyes had searched my face like he was looking for lies. "That's it? He didn't ask for anything?" "No." "Lily." He'd grabbed my shoulders, his grip almost painful. "Listen to me very carefully. Dante Moretti is not someone you want in your life. I don't care how much money he gave you or how polite he seemed. Men like him don't do favors. They make investments, and they always collect." I'd nodded, but Marco's warning sat in my stomach like a stone, because part of me, a part I didn't want to examine too closely, had been waiting for him to come back. watching the door every time it opened. Jumping when I heard a voice that sounded even remotely like his. It was pathetic. It was dangerous. But I couldn't seem to stop. On the third night, he came. Not to the restaurant. To me. I was walking home, later than usual because Sandra had called in sick and I'd covered her shift. The streets were mostly empty at 2 a.m, just the occasional taxi and the glow of bodega windows promising safety that was always 20 feet away. I'd learned to walk fast, head down, keys between my fingers like claws. The car pulled up beside me so smoothly I almost didn't notice it. A black SUV with windows tinted so dark they looked like liquid night. The back door opened, and Antonio stepped out, the same wall of muscle who'd appeared at the restaurant. I ran. It was instinct, pure and simple. I didn't think, didn't pause to question. I just ran, my feet pounding against the pavement, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and I was fast. Years of running from different kinds of danger had taught me that. But he was faster. A hand caught my arm, spinning me around, and I was ready to scream when another voice cut through the night. Let her go. Dante stood beside the SUV, and even in the darkness I could see the way his eyes tracked every movement I made. He looked different out here, less polished, more dangerous, like the restaurant had been a costume and this was who he really was. Antonio released me immediately and stepped back. You're scaring her, Dante said, and there was something like disapproval in his voice. He moved closer, slowly, the way you'd approach a frightened animal. Lily, I'm not going to hurt you. Then why are you here? My voice shook, but I lifted my chin, refusing to show more fear than I already had. Why are you following me? I'm not following you. I'm offering you a ride home. It's late, and this neighborhood... He gestured around us, at the shadows and the broken streetlights, and the graffiti that marked territory I'd learned to navigate through invisible rules and careful timing. It's not safe. I've been walking home at this time for 3 years. I know. The words hung between us, and I felt something cold slide down my spine. What do you mean, you know? He studied me for a long moment, and I saw the calculation in his eyes, the way he was weighing what to tell me, how much truth I could handle. I mean, I've been watching you, Lily, for longer than you realize. The world tilted. Why? Get in the car. I'll explain. Every instinct I had screamed at me to refuse, to run, to put as much distance between myself and this man as possible. But there was something in his voice, something that sounded almost like honesty. And I was so tired of being afraid, so tired of pretending I was safe when I'd never been safe a day in my life. And maybe, God help me, part of me wanted to know why a man like him would notice someone like me. I got in the car. The interior smelled like leather and money, all soft seats and tinted windows that made the outside world feel distant and unreal. Dante slid in beside me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat of his body, could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing. Antonio got in the driver's seat, and we pulled away from the curb so smoothly, it felt like floating. Where do you live? Dante asked. I gave him my address, because he probably already knew it anyway. Because what was the point of pretending I had any secrets left? We drove in silence through streets that looked different from inside this car, safer somehow, like the darkness couldn't quite reach us. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my nails digging into my palms, trying to ground myself in something real. 3 years ago, Dante said finally, his voice low, someone stole from me a significant amount of money and some items that were important to my business. The man who did it was named David Martinez. The name meant nothing to me. I shook my head. He worked for me. I trusted him. And he betrayed that trust in the worst way possible. Something dark passed across Dante's face, something that made me press back against the seat. When I found him, he told me he'd done it for a woman, that she was pregnant with his child, that he wanted to give them a better life. My stomach churned. I didn't like where this was going. I killed him, Dante said. And his voice didn't change, didn't betray even a flicker of emotion. He said it like he was commenting on the weather, like it was a simple fact of life. But before I did, He told me about you, about the woman he'd been seeing, the waitress who worked at Russo's, the one he was supposed to meet that night. The world stopped. No, I whispered. No, that's not. David and I weren't. We went on 3 dates. 3. I barely knew him. He knew you. He talked about you constantly, apparently, about how kind you were, how different from the women in his world, how you smiled at him like he was worth something. I felt sick. David had seemed nice, normal. A little intense, maybe, but I'd thought that was just interest, just the way some people were when they liked you. We'd gone to dinner, to a movie, for coffee once, and then he'd disappeared, stopped answering my texts, and I'd figured he'd found someone else or gotten back with an ex or simply decided I wasn't worth the effort. I'd never imagined he was dead, that he'd died thinking of me, using me as an excuse for his betrayal. I don't understand, I managed. Why are you telling me this? Because, Dante said, and he turned to face me fully. And in the dim light of the car, his eyes looked almost black. When I saw you at the restaurant, when my wife called you the help and treated you like you were nothing, I realized something. David was right about you. You are different. You are kind. And you deserve better than what you have. So what? You feel guilty? The words came out sharper than I intended, edged with something that might have been anger or might have been fear. You killed him, and now you think throwing money at me makes it better? No. His voice was firm. I don't feel guilty. He made his choice and he paid for it. But you didn't make any choice. You were just living your life, being kind to the wrong person, and that shouldn't have consequences. The car pulled up in front of my building, a 5-story walk-up with a broken buzzer and stairs that smelled like urine and old dreams. In the darkness, with the SUV's headlights cutting through the shadows, it looked even worse than usual. This is where you live, Dante said. And it wasn't a question. He'd known. Of course he'd known. Alone. Working doubles at a restaurant where people like my wife treat you like furniture. Sending every extra dollar to your mother in California for medical bills you'll never be able to fully pay. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. You have no right. I have every right. He leaned closer, and I could smell his cologne again, could see the silver in his hair that made him look distinguished instead of old. Because I own Russo's, Lily. I have for 5 years. Every shift you've worked, every tip you've earned, every time you've smiled through exhaustion and pain, I've seen it. Not directly, not always. But I pay attention to my investments, and you've been the most interesting investment I've made in a very long time. The world tilted again, spinning on an axis I didn't understand. You own, but the manager works for me. They all do. The whole restaurant is a front, Lily. A very profitable front, but a front nonetheless for other business ventures that I'm sure you can imagine. You're a criminal. The words came out flat, stating a fact rather than making an accusation. I'm a businessman. The legality of my business is flexible. And your wife. Something flickered across his face. Disgust, maybe, or exhaustion. Vanessa is not my wife. Not really. It's an arrangement. She plays a role, I play a role, and we both benefit from the appearance of legitimacy. But she's not. He stopped, jaw tightening. She doesn't matter. Then why were you having dinner with her? Because appearances matter in my world. Because there are people who need to see certain things to believe certain lies. He reached out, and before I could pull away, his fingers brushed against my cheek, catching a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, completely at odds with everything else about him. But I'm tired of lies, Lily. I'm tired of pretending. When I saw you the other night, when I saw how she treated you and realized who you were, David's kind waitress, the one he'd betrayed me for, I knew I had to do something. So you gave me money. I gave you a choice. You can take that money and disappear. Move to California. Take care of your mother. Start over somewhere I'll never find you. Or... He paused, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. And I should have pulled away. But I couldn't seem to move. Or you can stay. Let me help you. Let me show you that not every dangerous man is dangerous to you. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why me? Why do you care? Because, he said, and his voice dropped to something raw, something that sounded almost like truth. In 3 years of watching you smile through pain, of seeing you give kindness to people who don't deserve it, of witnessing your strength in the face of circumstances that would have broken anyone else, I've never once seen you be cruel. Not once. And in my world, Lily, that's rarer than diamonds. That's worth protecting. The car door opened. Antonio, giving us privacy while staying close enough to intervene if needed. Bodyguard. Always the bodyguard, I realized, because Dante Moretti never went anywhere unprotected, never took chances, never let his guard down except maybe, possibly, now. Think about it, Dante said. You have my number. If you want to leave, I'll arrange everything. If you want to stay... His eyes held mine, gray and storm-dark and filled with something that looked like hunger. If you want to stay, call me. There's something I want to show you. I got out of the car on legs that felt like water, walked up to my building's entrance with his gaze burning into my back. The SUV didn't move until I was inside, until the door had closed behind me, and only then did I hear the engine purr away into the night. My apartment felt different when I stumbled into it. Smaller. Emptier. The money was still on the table, the business card still beside it. I picked up the card with shaking hands and saw something I hadn't noticed before. On the back, in that same elegant handwriting, a single sentence: everyone deserves a choice. I didn't sleep that night either, but by morning, I knew what my choice would be. I called him at noon, when the sun was high enough that I could pretend this was a normal decision, a rational choice made in daylight instead of the product of a sleepless night filled with thoughts I shouldn't have been having. He answered on the first ring, Lily. Just my name, but the way he said it made my stomach flip, like he'd been waiting. Like he'd known I would call. You said you wanted to show me something. A pause, and I could almost hear him smile. I did. Are you free this evening? I have a shift at 6. Not anymore. I've handled it. Of course he had. He owned the restaurant. He owned my schedule, my livelihood, probably more of my life than I wanted to acknowledge. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it sent a strange thrill down my spine. Something dark and dangerous that I didn't want to examine too closely. Where? I asked. Antonio will pick you up at 7. Wear something comfortable. He hung up before I could respond, and I stood there holding my phone, wondering what the hell I'd just agreed to. The dress code for meeting a crime boss turned out to be more complicated than I'd anticipated. Comfortable could mean anything. Jeans seemed too casual, a dress too formal. I settled on black pants and a simple blue blouse that had cost me 2 weeks of tips, but made my eyes look brighter, less tired. I'd spent an hour on my hair and makeup, trying to look like someone who hadn't just made a deal with the devil. And when I caught my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. There was color in my cheeks, light in my eyes. I looked alive in a way I hadn't in years. It terrified me. Antonio arrived exactly at 7 in a different SUV. Still black, still tinted, but this one was somehow even more expensive looking. He opened the door without a word, and I climbed in with my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The interior was empty except for me. No Dante. We drove for 40 minutes, leaving the city behind, watching the buildings grow shorter and then disappear entirely as we headed into areas I'd only seen in magazines. Old money neighborhoods where the houses hid behind gates and trees, where you couldn't see your neighbors and they couldn't see you. The SUV turned down a private road lined with maples that had probably been planted before I was born. At the end of it stood a house that wasn't really a house. It was an estate, all stone and glass and sprawling gardens that looked like they required a full-time staff just to maintain. My mouth went dry. Antonio pulled up to the front entrance, where Dante was waiting. He'd changed since last night, no suit now, just dark pants and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. It should have made him look casual, approachable. Instead, it made him look more dangerous, like he'd shed some protective layer, and this was the real him underneath. Welcome, he said, opening my door himself before Antonio could move. What do you think? I looked up at the house, at the windows that reflected the sunset like pools of gold, at the grounds that seemed to stretch forever. I think I'm in way over my head. He laughed, a real laugh that transformed his face, and I realized I'd never heard him laugh before. Honest, I like that. Come on, there's something I want you to see before dinner. He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. His palm was warm, rough with those scars I'd noticed, and his fingers closed around mine with a gentleness that didn't match the rest of him. He led me not into the house, but around it, down a stone path that wound through gardens blooming with flowers I couldn't name. The evening air smelled like roses and jasmine, sweet and heady, and somewhere in the distance I could hear water running. We rounded a corner, and I stopped breathing. The garden opened into a courtyard built around a fountain, but not just any fountain. This one was enormous, 3 tiers of marble carved with such intricate detail it looked alive. Water cascaded down in sheets that caught the dying light, and around its base, someone had planted hundreds of lilies. White ones, pink ones, deep purple ones that looked almost black in the fading sun. They grew in wild profusion, spilling over the fountain's edge like a waterfall of petals. "You did this," I whispered. "Because of my name. I had it done this week," he admitted. "After I met you, I wanted you to see something beautiful. Something that was yours. I should have been touched. Maybe I was. But there was something else underneath the sentiment. Something that made my skin prickle with awareness. This wasn't a gift. This was a claim. A statement. This is what I can do for you. This is what you could have. It's manipulative," I said, turning to face him. "All of this. The money, the rides, the fountain. You're trying to buy me." "No." His voice was firm. "I'm trying to show you what your life could be. There's a difference." "Is there?" He moved closer, and I held my ground even though everything in me wanted to step back, to put distance between us. "Lily, I've spent my entire life in a world where everything is a transaction. Trust is currency. Loyalty is purchased. Love is a weakness that gets people killed." He reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, and I felt that touch everywhere. "But you give without expecting anything back. You smile at people who treat you like shit. You work yourself to exhaustion for a mother who's 3,000 miles away. And you do it all without complaint, without asking for recognition or reward. Do you know how rare that is? It's called being a decent person. In my world, decent people don't survive. Then maybe your world is the problem." He smiled at that, but it was sad, edged with something that looked like regret. "Maybe it is, but it's the only world I have, and I'm offering you a place in it, not as the help, not as someone who serves others, as an equal, as someone who matters. I don't understand what you want from me." "Neither do I," he admitted, and the honesty in his voice made my chest ache. "I just know that from the moment I saw you 3 days ago, before that really, from the first time I looked at security footage and saw you crying in the kitchen because you'd burned your hand, but couldn't afford to leave early, I knew I wanted you in my life, however you'd let me have you." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked like fire. In the dying light, with the fountain behind him and his eyes on mine, Dante Moretti looked almost human. Almost safe, but I knew better. "What happened to David?" I asked. "Really, the details you didn't tell me." His jaw tightened. "Lily, if you want me in your life, I need to know what that means. I need to know what you're capable of." He studied me for a long moment, and I saw him weighing options, calculating risks. Then he nodded, just once. "I'll tell you, but not here. Inside, over dinner. And after I tell you, if you want to leave, Antonio will take you home and you'll never hear from me again. Deal?" I should have said yes to that offer, should have run while I had the chance. But something in his eyes held me frozen. Something vulnerable and raw that I hadn't expected to see. "Deal," I whispered. The house was even more impressive inside. All high ceilings and marble floors, art on the walls that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime. But Dante led me past all of it to a smaller room at the back, intimate and warm with a fireplace crackling and a table set for 2. The meal appeared as if by magic. Staff that materialized and vanished without a word, bringing course after course of food so beautiful it seemed criminal to eat it. I picked at my plate, my stomach too twisted with nerves to appreciate the flavors, and watched Dante watching me. 3 years ago, he began, setting down his fork. David Martinez came to work for me as an accountant. He was good with numbers, discreet, seemed loyal. I trusted him with sensitive information, with money, with access to things that could destroy me if they fell into the wrong hands. He paused, taking a sip of wine the color of blood. After 6 months, I noticed discrepancies. Small ones at first, amounts that could have been mistakes, rounding errors. But they kept happening, and they always benefited David. So I had him followed. Outside, night had fallen completely. The windows reflected our images back at us. 2 people at a table, looking like a normal couple having a normal dinner. The lie of it was almost beautiful. He was skimming, Dante continued. Not much, but regularly, and he was meeting with someone, a woman. I thought maybe she was blackmailing him, or maybe she was part of some scheme to rob me. So I dug deeper. Found out about you. About the dates, the coffee, the way he talked about you to his friends, how he wanted to impress you, give you things, be someone worthy of you. I never asked for anything, I said, my voice small. I know. That's what made it worse in a way. He was stealing to buy you gifts you'd never accept, planning a future you'd never agreed to. He was delusional, Lily, obsessed, and that obsession made him careless. Dante's hand tightened around his wine glass, and for a moment I thought it might shatter. He took a ledger, one with names, dates, transactions that could have sent me to prison for life. He planned to use it as insurance, he said, to protect himself if I ever found out about the money, to protect you. He looked at me then, and his eyes were empty, cold. But insurance implies you plan to survive the threat. David didn't understand that some betrayals don't get forgiven. How did you kill him? The question came out steadier than I expected. Quickly, a bullet to the head. He didn't suffer, if that matters to you. I'm not a sadist, Lily. I don't enjoy causing pain. I just do what's necessary to survive, to protect what's mine. I set down my fork carefully, my hands shaking. And what happens if I betray you? What happens if I take your money and your pretty fountain and decide I don't want to play your games anymore? Nothing. The word was immediate, firm. You're not part of my organization. You haven't sworn loyalty to me. You're not... He stopped, jaw working. You're different. The rules don't apply to you the same way. Why not? Because I don't want them to. He stood abruptly, moving to the window, his back to me, because for the first time in 20 years, I met someone who makes me want to be something other than what I am. And I don't know what to do with that. The silence stretched between us, heavy with words neither of us seemed able to say. Outside, I could see the fountain lit up now, the lilies glowing white in the darkness like ghosts. I need time, I said finally, to think, to process all of this. He turned, and the vulnerability I'd seen earlier was gone, replaced by the calculating crime boss I was beginning to realize was the mask, not the truth. How much time? I don't know. A few days? A week? Take as long as you need. He moved back to the table, pulling something from his pocket, a phone, sleek and expensive. But take this. It's secure, encrypted, only I have the number. If you need anything, call. If you're in danger, call. If you just want to talk. His voice softened. Call. I took the phone because refusing felt dangerous. Felt like burning a bridge I might need later. And what do I do with my normal phone? Keep it. Use it as usual. But for anything related to me, use this one. Trust me on this, Lily. There are people who would hurt you to get to me. People who wouldn't hesitate to use someone I care about as leverage. You barely know me. I know enough. He moved closer. And this time I did step back, my spine hitting the wall. He stopped just out of reach, giving me space but making his presence felt. I know you bite your lip when you're nervous. I know you hum while you work. Usually songs from the 80s that your mother probably played when you were young. I know you have a scar on your left hand from when a line cook grabbed you and you pulled away so fast you burned yourself on a pan. My breath caught. You've been watching me for months, longer. No apology, no shame, just fact. Ever since David mentioned you, I've been aware of you. And after he died, I couldn't seem to look away. You haunted me, Lily. This woman he'd thrown everything away for. I had to know if you were worth it. And? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Am I? He reached out slowly, giving me time to move, and cupped my face with a gentleness that made my eyes burn. You're worth so much more than he could have ever understood, than I can properly express. Then he kissed me. It wasn't rough or demanding. It was soft, questioning, like he was asking permission even as he took what he wanted. His lips were warm against mine, tasting of wine and something darker, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe, forgot where I was, forgot everything, except the feeling of his mouth on mine and his hand cradling my face like I was something precious. When he pulled back, his eyes were storm dark, pupils dilated with something that looked like hunger. That was a mistake, I managed. Probably. He didn't sound sorry, but I'm not known for playing it safe. Antonio drove me home an hour later with the phone burning a hole in my pocket, and Dante's taste still on my lips. I didn't look back as we pulled away from the estate, didn't let myself think about fountains full of lilies, or the way his voice had cracked when he talked about wanting to be different. But when I got home and lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd kissed me, like I was air and he'd been drowning, like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. The phone buzzed at midnight with a single text. Sweet dreams, Lily. Tomorrow I'll tell you what I really want. I stared at those words until my eyes burned, and when I finally slept, I dreamed of fountains and blood, and a man with storm-gray eyes who looked at me like I was salvation and damnation all at once. The phone rang at 6 a.m, jarring me from dreams I couldn't quite remember, but that left me tangled in sheets and breathing hard. Hello? My voice was rough with sleep. I'm sorry. Dante's voice, but different. Urgent. Tight with something that might have been fear. I know it's early. I need you to listen very carefully. I sat up, suddenly wide awake. What's wrong? Vanessa knows about you, about the money, the dinner, everything. And she's not taking it well. A pause, then, Antonio is already outside your building. Get dressed. Pack a bag with essentials. You need to leave. Now. My heart hammered against my ribs. I don't understand. She's dangerous, Lily, more than I realized. I thought I could manage her, contain her jealousy, but I was wrong. She's made threats, specific ones, against you. I stumbled to the window, pulled back the curtain with shaking hands. Sure enough, the black SUV was parked at the curb, Antonio standing beside it, his eyes scanning the street like he expected an attack at any moment. This is insane, I said, but I was already moving, grabbing clothes from my closet, shoving them into a duffel bag I'd bought at a thrift store years ago. She's your wife. She's not my wife, he cut me off, and his voice was hard now, controlled. She's a business arrangement that's about to be terminated, but until I can handle this properly, you need to be somewhere she can't reach you. Where? The estate. It's secure. Guards, cameras, safe rooms if necessary. No one gets in without my permission. I stopped packing, bag half full, and stared at nothing. You're asking me to move into your house, to hide from your fake wife because you kissed me once and gave me money. I'm asking you to let me keep you safe. There's a difference. Is there? I threw his own words back at him. Or is this just another manipulation? Another way to control the situation, to keep me where you want me? Silence on the other end, long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Then, if I wanted to control you, Lily, I'd have done it already. I'd have made it so you lost your apartment, so you had nowhere to go but to me. I'd have destroyed every other option until I was all you had left, but I didn't. I won't. This is a choice. Stay in your apartment and risk Vanessa's people finding you, or come to the estate where I can protect you. Either way, I'll have guards on you. Either way, you're in danger because I was selfish enough to want you in my life." The guilt in his voice sounded real, so did the fear. And maybe I was stupid, maybe I was naive, but I believed him. "Give me 10 minutes, I said, and hung up. The estate looked different in daylight. Less romantic, more fortress-like. I could see the cameras now, discreet but everywhere, tracking my approach. The walls around the property were higher than I'd realized, topped with something that might have been decorative ironwork, but was probably more functional than ornamental. Antonio led me inside without a word, my duffel bag in his massive hands looking like a child's toy. The house was quiet, eerily so, and I wondered how many people actually lived here, how many rooms stood empty, waiting for purposes I couldn't imagine. Dante was in what looked like an office, all dark wood and leather, walls lined with books in languages I didn't recognize. He stood when I entered, and I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, who'd spent the night making calls and arrangements and preparing for a war I didn't understand. "Thank you for coming," he said, and his voice was softer now, gentler. "I know this isn't what you signed up for." "I didn't sign up for anything," I reminded him. "You just appeared in my life and turned everything upside down." "I know. And I'm sorry for that. Sorrier than I can express." He moved toward me, stopped an arm's length away, close enough to touch but respecting the distance. "But I'm not sorry for wanting you safe, for doing whatever it takes to make that happen. Tell me about Vanessa, the truth this time. All of it." He nodded, gesturing to a leather couch that probably cost more than my car. I sat, and he took the chair across from me, maintaining that careful distance. "Her real name is Vanessa Calabresi. She's the daughter of Marco Calabresi, who runs one of the 5 families in New York. Our marriage, the fake one, was arranged 5 years ago as a peace treaty. A way to unite 2 organizations, prevent a war that would have cost hundreds of lives. So you've been pretending to be married for 5 years? Yes. Living in separate wings of this house, maintaining the appearance in public, but with no real relationship, no intimacy, no affection, just business." His jaw tightened. But Vanessa wanted more. She's always wanted more. She saw the arrangement as an opportunity, a way to gain real power by actually becoming my wife. And when I kept refusing, when I made it clear that this would never be more than a facade, she became unstable. Unstable how? Violent. Unpredictable. She's had people hurt before, usually staff members she thought had slighted her. Nothing fatal, but enough to send a message. I've kept her contained, mostly, by making sure she understands that her position depends on my goodwill. But now... He ran a hand through his hair, and I noticed the silver at his temples again. Wondered if some of it had come from dealing with her. Now she sees you as a threat, as the reason I won't make our arrangement real. And that makes her dangerous. Can't you just end it? Tell her father the deal is off, not without starting the war the arrangement was meant to prevent. Marco won't take kindly to me humiliating his daughter, treaty or no treaty. There are politics involved, alliances, debts and favors that go back decades. It's complicated. So what's your plan? He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my breath catch. I'm going to offer Marco something better. A different alliance. One that strengthens both our positions without requiring his daughter's involvement. And then I'm going to make sure Vanessa understands that if she comes near you again, treaty be damned, I will end her. The casual way he said it, I will end her, should have terrified me. Instead, it sent a shiver down my spine that wasn't entirely about fear. And what happens to me during all this? I just hide here like a prisoner while you play politics with mob families? You're not a prisoner. He stood, moving to the window, his back to me. You can leave anytime you want, but if you stay, I want to offer you something that would protect you even if I couldn't. What? He turned, and the look on his face was serious, almost grave. A position in my organization. A real one, not ceremonial. I want you to become my partner, Lily. Not in the romantic sense. Not yet. Not until you choose that freely. But in business. I want to teach you everything about how my world works, how money moves, how power operates, how to protect yourself, and the things you care about. I stared at him, sure I'd misheard. You want to make me a criminal? I want to make you powerful. There's a difference. I don't know anything about your world. I'm a waitress. You're a woman who survived 3 years of poverty and exhaustion without losing your humanity. Do you know how much strength that takes? How much intelligence it requires to navigate a world that's designed to break people like you? You're already more qualified than half the men who work for me. He moved closer. And this time I didn't step back. I've been watching you, Lily. Really watching. I've seen how you handle difficult customers, how you diffuse situations before they escalate, how you remember details about people's orders and preferences. You're observant, adaptable, and you think on your feet. Those are exactly the skills you need in my world. And if I say no, then you stay here as my guest until it's safe for you to leave, and we go back to being whatever we were before. Strangers who shared a moment, nothing more. But we both knew that was a lie. We could never be strangers again, not after everything he'd told me, everything I'd seen. I need time to think, I said again, and hated how repetitive it sounded, how weak. Take all the time you need. Your room is ready. Antonio will show you. The house is yours to explore. There's a library, a gym, the gardens. Anything you want. As if on cue, Antonio appeared in the doorway. I stood, suddenly exhausted, feeling like I'd aged years in the past few days. Lily, Dante said as I reached the door. One more thing. The money I gave you, I know you used most of it for your mother's bills. Let me cover the rest. All of them. Let me make sure she has the best care possible. Why would you do that? Because it matters to you, and what matters to you matters to me. I left before I could respond, before I could analyze the warmth that spread through my chest at his words, before I could acknowledge the terrifying truth that I was starting to care what happened to this dangerous man who'd invaded my life like a storm. The room Antonio showed me to was beautiful, all soft creams and golds, with a 4-poster bed that looked like something from a fairy tale and windows overlooking the fountain. My fountain, I caught myself thinking, then immediately felt ashamed. I unpacked my meager belongings, my thrift store clothes looking pathetic in the ornate wardrobe, and tried to make sense of everything that had happened in less than a week. One moment I'd been spilling wine on a stranger's wife. Now I was hiding in a crime boss's mansion while he offered to make me his business partner. It was insane. All of it. But what was the alternative? Go back to my studio apartment? Back to double shifts and medical bills and the slow, grinding erosion of hope? Go back to being invisible, to being the help, to spending my life serving people who'd never know my name? The phone, the encrypted one, buzzed in my pocket. A message from Dante. Check the closet. Frowning, I opened the wardrobe I'd just loaded with my clothes. Behind them, hidden by a false back that swung open when I pushed, was another section. Full of clothes. My size. Expensive, beautiful things in colors that would complement my skin tone, styles that were elegant but practical. Another text. You need better clothes for this world. Consider it a work uniform, not a gift. I should have been offended. Should have seen it as another manipulation, another way to remake me into what he wanted. But standing there looking at dresses and suits that would let me walk into any room with confidence, I felt something else entirely. I felt seen, understood. Like he'd looked at me, really looked, and thought about what I would need to survive in his world, not just what he wanted to see me wear. Thank you, I texted back, and meant it. His response came immediately. Dinner is at 8. We have guests. Important ones. I'd like you there. As what? Your prisoner? Your charity case? As my partner, if you're willing. I stared at that message for a long time, watching the cursor blink, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on me. This was it. The moment where I decided who I was going to be. Safe and poor and invisible, or dangerous and powerful and seen. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. Be brave, Lily. Be braver than I was. What should I wear? I texted back. And just like that, I stepped over a line I could never uncross. The dress I chose was midnight blue, cut to flatter without being overtly sexual. Elegant enough for business, but striking enough to be memorable. I spent an hour on my hair and makeup, trying to look like someone who belonged in this world. And when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked powerful. I looked dangerous. I looked like someone Dante Moretti might actually partner with. Antonio escorted me down at precisely 8, and I could hear voices from the dining room. Men's voices, speaking Italian in low, serious tones. My heart hammered as we approached, and I wanted to run, to hide, to be anywhere but walking into a room full of criminals who would see through me in seconds. But Antonio opened the door, and there was no turning back. The room fell silent when I entered. 5 men sat around the table, all of them turning to look at me with expressions ranging from surprise to suspicion. Dante stood at the head, and when our eyes met, something passed between us, acknowledgement, maybe, or solidarity. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "Allow me to introduce Lily Chen, my new business partner, and the person who will be overseeing our restaurant operations moving forward." A collective intake of breath. One man, older with gray hair and cold eyes, laughed. "You're joking. I never joke about business, Carlo." Dante's voice went hard. "Lily has a unique understanding of how our legitimate operations function from the ground up. She's observed patterns, identified inefficiencies, and has ideas for improvements that could increase our profits by 15%. I've reviewed her proposals, and they're sound." My proposals? I hadn't made any proposals, but I kept my face blank, nodded once, and moved to the empty seat beside Dante, as if I'd done this 1,000 times before. "She's a waitress," another man said, his accent thick. "What does she know about running an organization?" "She's an observer," Dante corrected, and his hand found mine under the table, squeezed once. Support, encouragement, warning, and observation is the most valuable skill in our business. Wouldn't you agree, Vincent? The man, Vincent, subsided, but his eyes on me were calculating, suspicious. Dinner was a test, I realized, not of my knowledge or skills, but of my ability to sit in a room full of dangerous men and not flinch, to listen and learn, to keep my mouth shut when necessary and speak with authority when required. Dante helped, guiding the conversation, throwing me questions I could answer, making it seem natural that I was there. And slowly, impossibly, I found my footing. Found that 3 years of reading people, of understanding what they wanted before they asked, translated surprisingly well to this world. By the time dessert arrived, 2 of the men were asking me questions. By the time coffee was served, Carlo had stopped glaring. And by the time they left, shaking Dante's hand and nodding to me with something approaching respect, I realized I'd just survived my first meeting as a member of a criminal organization. Dante closed the door behind the last of them and turned to me, and the pride in his eyes made my chest ache. "You were perfect," he said. "Better than perfect. You were exactly what I knew you could be." I had no idea what I was doing. Neither do half the men who work for me. The difference is you're smart enough to learn, brave enough to try, and honest enough to admit what you don't know. He moved closer, and this time when he touched my face, I leaned into it. "You belong here, Lily, in this world, with me. Can you feel it?" And God help me, I could. I could feel the power thrumming through my veins, could feel the way those men had looked at me by the end of the night, not as the help, but as someone who mattered, someone who could hurt them or help them, someone with value beyond serving their meals. "What happens now?" I whispered. "Now," he said, and his thumb traced my lower lip. "Now we make you official. Now we teach you everything. And now we deal with Vanessa once and for all." He kissed me again, deeper this time, and I kissed him back with the hunger of someone who'd been invisible her whole life and was finally being seen. The next 3 weeks were a blur of education and transformation that left me dizzy with the speed of change. Every morning, Dante would meet me in his office, spreading ledgers and contracts and documents across the massive desk, teaching me to read between the lines, to see the patterns in numbers that told stories of loyalty and betrayal. "This restaurant," he'd say, pointing to a column of figures, is showing declining profits but increasing inventory costs. What does that tell you? Someone's skimming, I'd answer. And he'd smile that dangerous smile that made my stomach flip. Good. Who? And I'd learn to trace the pattern back, to find the manager or the supplier or the accountant who thought they were clever enough to steal from Dante Moretti. We'd proven them wrong. Every single time. But it wasn't just about numbers. Dante taught me about power, how to hold it, how to wield it, how to make people believe you had more of it than you actually did. He taught me about reading body language, about the subtle cues that revealed when someone was lying or afraid or planning something. He taught me about the delicate balance of fear and respect that kept his organization running. And at night, after the lessons, we'd have dinner together. Sometimes with guests, more meetings where I learned to navigate the complex politics of his world. But more often just the two of us, talking about everything and nothing, and I'd catch glimpses of the man beneath the crime boss, someone who loved obscure jazz music and old movies, who'd grown up poor like me and clawed his way to power through intelligence and ruthlessness in equal measure. We didn't kiss again after that first night. Dante maintained a careful distance, professional and proper, and I told myself I was relieved. Told myself the disappointment I felt was just my ego, just the part of me that had liked being wanted by someone powerful. I was lying to myself, and we both knew it. Vanessa was dealt with in the third week. I wasn't there for the actual meeting. Dante insisted I stay at the estate, protected by Antonio and 3 other guards whose names I'd learned. Marcus, David, the irony wasn't lost on me, and a woman named Sophia who was terrifying in her efficiency. But I watched through security cameras as Dante met with Marco Calabresi in a restaurant I now knew we owned. Watched as he laid out his proposal with the kind of calm authority that made powerful men listen. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw Marco's expression change from anger to consideration to grudging respect. When Dante returned, he looked exhausted, but satisfied. "It's done," he said, pouring himself a drink, with hands that shook just slightly. Marco agreed to dissolve the arrangement. Vanessa will be sent to run their operations in Miami, far enough away that she won't be a problem, important enough that it saves face for Marco. And the threat to me? Gone. I made it very clear what would happen if anyone in the Calabresi family came after you. Marco's old school. He understands the rules. You hurt mine, I hurt yours. And nobody wins. He'll keep Vanessa in line. Relief flooded through me, so strong my knees went weak, so I can go home. Dante's face shuddered, went carefully blank. Yes, if that's what you want. Your apartment is still yours, your job at Russo's if you want it back. Everything can go back to the way it was. But we both knew that was impossible. I wasn't the same person who'd spilled wine 3 weeks ago. I couldn't go back to being invisible, to serving people who treated me like furniture, to pretending I didn't know what I now knew about power and money, and the dark spaces where they intersected. What if I don't want to go back? The words came out barely above a whisper. He moved so fast I barely saw him coming, crossing the room to pull me into his arms with a desperation that spoke louder than words. Then stay. Stay and be my partner. Stay and learn everything I can teach you. Stay and let me... He stopped, his forehead pressed against mine, his breath ragged. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. Fully. Freely. With everything I have. You barely know me. I know enough. His hands cupped my face, thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized were falling. I know you're brave enough to walk into a room full of criminals and make them respect you. I know you're smart enough to see through manipulation even when you choose to accept it anyway. I know you have the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. And somehow, impossibly, you've chosen to see something worth saving in me. You killed a man who mentioned my name. I did. And I'd do it again. I'd do worse if it meant keeping you safe. No apology. No shame. Just truth. I'm not a good man, Lily. I never have been, and I probably never will be. But I could be good to you. I could give you everything you've ever wanted, and things you didn't even know to want, if you let me. I thought about my studio apartment with its broken buzzer and water-stained ceiling. Thought about my mother in California, whose latest medical bills had been paid in full by a man who'd never even met her. Thought about the way Dante's men now nodded to me with respect, the way Carlo had asked my opinion on a supplier issue yesterday, the way I'd felt powerful for the first time in my life. But more than that, I thought about the way Dante looked at me like I was precious, the way he'd spent hours teaching me things he'd learned over decades, patient and thorough, and genuinely pleased when I understood, the way he'd killed for me, threatened for me, changed his entire world to make room for me in it. It should have terrified me. Maybe it did. But it also made me feel more alive than I'd ever felt serving coffee to people who'd never know my name. "I want immunity," I said, pulling back to look him in the eye. "For my mother. If something happens to you, if your enemies come after your organization, I want her protected. Completely. No matter what." He smiled. And it was real. Reaching his eyes for the first time since I'd known him. "Done. I'll have the paperwork drawn up tomorrow. She'll be under the protection of 3 different families, with accounts set up in her name that can't be touched even if I die. Anything else? I want to keep learning. Not just about the restaurants, but about everything. All of it. I want to actually be your partner, not just your pretty accessory. You were never going to be just an accessory, Lily. I don't collect decorative things. I collect assets. And you..." He kissed me softly, barely a brush of lips. "You're the most valuable asset I've ever acquired." "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" I asked, even though I thought I knew. "Besides someone to manage your restaurants?" "I get you. Simple. Direct. Devastating in its honesty. I get to wake up every morning knowing you're in my house. I get to teach you things and watch you master them with that focused intensity you have. I get to introduce you to people who've known me for decades and watch them realize I've finally found something worth protecting more than power. I get to fall asleep at night knowing you're safe. That's not nothing, Lily. For someone like me, that's everything." This time when he kissed me, I kissed him back with all the hunger and fear and desperate hope I'd been carrying for 3 weeks. His hands tangled in my hair and mine clutched at his shirt, and we were both breathing hard when we finally pulled apart. "Stay," he whispered against my lips. "Not as my prisoner or my charity case or my student. Stay as my partner, my equal." "Yes," I interrupted, because I knew if I thought too hard about this, I'd talk myself out of it, would find all the reasons this was insane and dangerous and wrong. "Yes, I'll stay." The smile he gave me then was pure joy, unguarded and real, and I realized I'd never seen him truly happy before. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost innocent despite everything I knew he'd done. "I need to tell you something," he said, leading me to the couch, pulling me down beside him. "About the restaurant operations you'll be overseeing. Okay? They're legitimate, completely. I wasn't lying when I said you'd be running them. You will be. But they're also more than that. They're your safety net, your insurance policy." I frowned. "I don't understand." "The restaurants are in your name now, all of them. The deeds, the accounts, everything. If something happens to me, if my enemies come after the organization, you're protected. You're a legitimate businesswoman who had no knowledge of any illegal activities. The restaurants are worth about $40 million, by the way. Free and clear." I stopped breathing. "You're giving me $40 million? I'm giving you independence. Power. The ability to walk away anytime you want and still have a life. A future. Security. Because I need you to stay with me because you choose to, not because you have no other options." His hand found mine, squeezed. "I need to know that every day you wake up in my house, it's because you want to be here, not because you're trapped. That's..." I couldn't find words. "That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever done for me." He laughed, pulling me closer. "Giving you a criminal empire disguised as a restaurant chain is romantic. Your standards are worryingly low." "My standards are perfect," I corrected, and kissed him again. Because I could. Because he was mine now in the same way I was his. They're just specific. 6 months later, I stood in Russo's, my Russo's now, watching the dinner service with the eye of someone who understood every aspect of how the operation ran. The manager reported to me weekly. The staff knew my name. The customers who'd once ignored me now stood when I entered. I was wearing Valentino, real Valentino, Not the kind Vanessa had claimed I'd ruined, and my hair was swept up in a style that had cost more than I used to make in a month. But underneath the expensive clothes and the confident posture, I was still me. Still the girl who knew what it felt like to choose between medicine and food. Still someone who remembered what it meant to be invisible. I just chose not to be invisible anymore. "Mrs. Moretti," Marco said, approaching my table with a deference that still surprised me sometimes. "Your usual table is ready, Mrs. Moretti." We'd gotten married quietly 2 months ago, a small ceremony with no guests except Antonio and Sophia as witnesses, nothing like the elaborate fake wedding he'd had with Vanessa. Just the two of us, making promises we intended to keep, binding ourselves together in ways that went deeper than contracts or convenience. "Thank you, Marco," I said, and meant it. He'd been resistant at first, this manager who'd watched me struggle as a waitress for 3 years. But he'd learned. They all had. Dante was waiting at our table, the same corner table where everything had started, where his fake wife had called me the help, and set off a chain of events that had remade my entire world. He stood when he saw me, as he always did, and pulled out my chair with a gallantry that would have seemed old-fashioned if it didn't make me feel cherished. "How was your day?" he asked. And I loved that he genuinely wanted to know, that he listened when I talked about inventory issues and staffing problems with the same attention he gave to his other, less legitimate business ventures. "Productive. The new suppliers are working out well, and I think we can open the Chicago location by spring if the permits come through." I paused. "And I fired Thomas." His eyebrows rose. "The sous chef? Why?" "Because I saw the way he looked at the new waitress. The way he spoke to her. And I remembered what it felt like to be looked at like that, spoken to like that. So I fired him." Dante's hand covered mine on the table, warm and solid. "You're going to be a better boss than I ever was. I learned from the best. I just added in the part where I actually care about the employees as people." He laughed, that real laugh I'd learned to coax out of him, and signaled the waiter, our waiter, who served us with respect and genuine warmth, who I'd given a raise to last month because he had a daughter in college and was working 3 jobs. The wine came, a Chateau Margaux, the same kind that had spilled that first night. I'd ordered it deliberately, a private joke between us. "To new beginnings," Dante said, raising his glass. "To being seen," I countered. We drank, and across the restaurant I caught sight of a young waitress struggling with a heavy tray. Exhaustion evident in every line of her body. I watched a woman at another table snap her fingers at her, watched the waitress's face carefully arrange itself into a pleasant smile that didn't reach her eyes. I knew that smile. I'd worn it for years. "Excuse me," I said to Dante, standing. "There's something I need to do." I crossed the restaurant, conscious of how different I looked now, how much power I carried in every step. The woman who'd snapped her fingers glanced up, and I saw recognition flicker in her eyes. Not of me specifically, but of someone she needed to impress. "Is there a problem?" I asked, my voice pleasant but with steel underneath. "The service here is terrible," she complained. "I've been waiting 20 minutes for, then perhaps you should try being patient." I interrupted smoothly. "Our staff works very hard to provide excellent service. If you can't treat them with basic respect, I'm happy to arrange for you to dine elsewhere." Her mouth fell open. Behind me, I felt Dante's presence, his silent support, his willingness to back whatever play I made. "Do you know who I am?" the woman sputtered. "I don't care who you are," I said, and meant it. "In my restaurants, we treat people with dignity. All people, including the ones who serve you. If that's a problem, I suggest you leave." She left, sputtering about lawsuits and reviews, and I turned to the young waitress who was staring at me with wide eyes. "What's your name?" I asked gently. "Sarah," she whispered. "How long have you been working here, Sarah?" 3 months. "And how are you being treated? By the staff, the management, the customers? Tell me honestly. You won't get in trouble." Sarah bit her lip, considering. Then, mostly okay, but some customers. They think because we're servers, we're not really people. You know? "I know," I said, and smiled at the memory of who I'd been, at the journey that had brought me here. I know exactly what that feels like. And I want you to know something, Sarah. In my restaurants, you're not the help. You're an employee, a valued one. If anyone treats you otherwise, you come to me. Understand? She nodded, tears in her eyes. And I saw myself in her, the exhaustion, the hope, the desperate need to be seen as something more than just a means to an end. I went back to Dante, who was watching me with that look he got sometimes, the one that said he was falling in love with me all over again. You know that's going to hurt our bottom line, he said as I sat down. Throwing out paying customers, we can afford it, and some things are more important than profit. Like what? Like remembering where we came from, like making sure no one else has to feel invisible the way I did. I leaned forward. This is why you gave me the restaurants, isn't it? Not just as insurance or a safety net. You wanted me to make them better, more than just fronts for your other businesses. You wanted me to turn them into something real. I wanted you to turn them into whatever you wanted them to be, he corrected. I just had a feeling you'd choose this. Choose to help people like you used to be. It's who you are, Lily. It's what makes you extraordinary. We finished dinner as night fell over the city. Two people who'd started in impossible places and found each other in the darkness. It wasn't a fairy tale. We both knew that. Dante was still a criminal, still dangerous, still capable of violence I tried not to think about too closely. And I was still learning to navigate a world where power and fear were currencies, where loyalty was everything and betrayal meant death. But we were real. The love between us was real. The partnership we'd built was real. And as we left the restaurant together, Dante's hand warm in mine, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. Invisible, exhausted, slowly being ground down by a world that didn't care if she survived. I thought about how one spilled glass of wine had changed everything, had led me to this man who saw me, really saw me, and decided I was worth fighting for. No regrets? Dante asked as Antonio opened the car door. I looked back at Russo's, at the lit windows and the people inside, at Sarah clearing tables with a little more confidence than she'd had an hour ago. Looked at the city spreading out around us, full of danger and possibility and second chances for people brave enough to take them. Not a single one, I said, and meant it with every fiber of my being. We drove home through streets that no longer frightened me, to a house that had become ours, to a life we'd built together from impossible circumstances and choices that should have destroyed us but somehow, miraculously, had saved us instead. And if sometimes I still dreamed of that night, of wine spilling, of storm-gray eyes meeting mine, of the moment when everything changed, I woke up in Dante's arms and remembered that the best stories aren't the ones that start with once upon a time. They're the ones that start with, I should have run, but I stayed. And they're the ones that end not with happily ever after, but with happily enough, together. For now and always. The fountain of lilies bloomed eternal in our garden, a reminder of who I'd been and who I'd become. And every time I looked at it, I smiled, knowing that sometimes the most dangerous choice is also the right one. Sometimes the monster teaches you to be brave. Sometimes the king makes you his queen. Sometimes the girl who was invisible becomes impossible to ignore, and sometimes, just sometimes, love looks like a man willing to burn down his entire world just to make sure you're safe in it. That was enough for me. It would always be enough.